the global economic have in store in 2011? So U.S. recovery is still on track?
It's a really good question. I think that trying to understand what the global economy has in store in 2011 is something that can be very difficult for all of us. The global economy has always been a very complex animal, and I think although there's a lot of research, a lot of data available today, I'm not sure that most people understand it any better now than maybe they did hundreds of years ago. There was a piece of research we came across recently that showed of 36,000 registered economists in the world, only 20 of those people actually managed to predict or forecast the biggest single global economic event of our lifetimes, which is the financial crisis of 2008. Most of the others, or all the others, simply didn't see it coming. We've been doing some research, some work to try and understand what it is that meant 20 people managed to predict this, whereas 36,000 just didn't see it at all. And one factor, I guess, that's emerged is that the people who seem to have the best understanding are the ones who are able to look at a very big picture take on the economy and actually try and understand exactly where the economy is in context. We've always believed that the economy is cyclical and that there are four main aspects, or seasons as we call them, to that cyclicality. So we kind of see it almost as a Western type year, with spring, with summer, with autumn, and then followed by winter. And if you look at the current cycle, we think that the last spring cycle started in 1949 when the Great Depression ended, and at that stage the Dow index was at about 181 points. And we started to see growth, we started to see job creation, we started to see trade, and that ran for a period of probably about 17 years till 1966. That's when spring ended and that's when summer started. And the difference between them was that summer is a period when we get much more leverage, much more borrowing. People are feeling good because there is so much trade, and that brings a lot of debt into the economy. Now that fuels the growth, but it also fuels inflation. And so that tends to be a period where it's good for commodities, it's good for real estate, but it causes headwinds and problems for, say, bond markets or for equity markets, because interest rates generally tend to get raised. And we think that phase lasted till about 1980, and the Dow, which had risen from 181 points to 968 points in the spring cycle, pretty well went nowhere and fell back to about 838 points by 1980. And the price of gold, which in the spring cycle hadn't really gone anywhere, it had moved from, say, $31, $32 to about $35 an ounce, that suddenly shot up to $850 an ounce in the summer cycle. At the end of summer, obviously we've got high interest rates, we've got high inflation, and that tends to lead to what we call the autumn phase of the cycle, which is where we see disinflation coming in. That's a slowdown in the inflation rate, it's a slowdown in the rate of leverage. It's a very healthy period for stocks, but it's quite a bad period for things like precious metals and commodities. So from 1980 to around 2000, we saw the Dow Jones go from 838 points up to almost 12,000 points, which is a huge leap, but we saw the price of gold fall back from $850 to $250 an ounce. Since 2000, we've been fairly sure that the Western world is in what we call economic winter. So this is a really deflationary time. It's a very difficult time for most asset classes. Certainly for stocks, it's not very positive. For real estate, it's not very positive. And the deflationary impact is usually pretty negative for commodities as well. So we think that that's the state of the cycle that the Western world is in right now. What we're not sure about is how much longer that this is going to last. Or the deflationary part of the cycle in around 1996, 97, and we think that they took a lot of the right measures. They actually dealt with a lot of the debt problems, and we think Asia is actually exiting from the winter cycle and about to start a whole new spring cycle and about to take off and do really well again. But we think the Western world is still somewhere in that winter cycle, and I guess trying to understand what the global economy is going to do in 2011 really depends on how close you think we are to the end of winter and the start of spring, or whether you think we've still got some long, dark winter days ahead for the Western economy.
Doesn't help them to get it rid of from the winter seasons.
So again, that's a really good point, and I think that's really the key to trying to understand where we're going to from here. And I suppose one thing that we're very aware of is, sometimes in the middle of winter you can get one or two really nice days and you start to think that maybe it's springtime, but then all of a sudden you go out without your coat on and you find yourself getting absolutely drenched with rain and freezing cold. So we're just a little bit worried that the effect of the QE policies that the Western governments or the US government, UK government have been adopting, and the bail-ins and bailouts that the European governments have been adopting, we're just a little bit concerned that what they're doing is they're kind of hiding the symptoms. They're covering up the symptoms without really dealing with the problems or dealing with the disease. Mm-hmm. And therefore it may well be that it looks like we're maybe further ahead on the recovery, or further ahead on this getting through winter and getting back into spring. Maybe it looks like we're further ahead than we really are. And I guess there's a very good precedent for that historically, which was that in 1931 everybody celebrated the end of the Great Depression in the States and in the Western world, and then in 1932 they had what was called the tragic year, when they actually found out that it really was every bit as bad, in fact far worse than they'd anticipated. So I think there's a little bit of a note of caution that people should be sounding about the Western economies. We don't really understand how we could be coming out of winter if there's so much of a debt burden still hanging around those economies, and we think they've still got quite a bit of work to do, and therefore we're a little bit concerned about the impact that those economies are going to have on the global economy in 2011 and going forwards from there.